So going against the general consensus of what people think about the Surface Go, I've decided to choose the Surface Go and not the Surface Pro 7. Let me explain why. Hey, what's up world, One Tech Traveler. Now you can see my thoughts about why I chose the Surface Go over the Surface Pro 7 on my website at onetechtraveler.com. You can see it down below. And why not subscribe to my channel to see more awesome videos like this one, where I share my travel stories, gear reviews, and more. So yes, this is a big statement, choosing the entry-level Surface Go over the Surface Pro 7. But in some ways, there is logic to this kind of expectation, and I want to put some context into this matter. So of course, the Surface Go is the smaller, much less powerful version than the Surface Pro 7, the latest one to come out from Microsoft, that is slightly larger, much more powerful, and has the same form factor. Now you can see that I'm pretty well versed when it comes to Microsoft's Surface devices, having the original Surface Book 1 that you see here for nearly 4 years, and I'll put that in a separate video where I'll share my thoughts of how well it's been during that time period. I've also used the Surface Pro 6, 4, 3, and even down to the Surface RT, Surface 2, and Surface 3. Those were the smaller versions, which the Go is pretty much the successor to, with some changes along the way. And don't get me wrong, I love the Surface Pro 7 and even considered the Surface Pro 6, considering what I want to do. However, there was just some charm specific to the Surface Go, which is why I like it, and for my use case scenario fits my purpose. Now that doesn't mean that the Go can't be your main device. If you are intending to do light tasks, then the Go has a lot going for it. Now, to be clear, the Surface Go is intended to be my secondary device, where the Surface Book, for all of the heavy duty intensive tasks that it's pretty capable of doing, is just way too heavy and cumbersome, especially as I like to travel around, take photographs, and just work in cafes when I'm not necessarily needing to use all of the power of the book. Now, with all that being said, let me highlight some of the key points of why I choose the Surface Go. And the first one is smaller is a good thing. So actually, one of the biggest points that I just couldn't get over was just how much smaller this is and why that is a good thing. The Go has a 10-inch 3:2 aspect ratio, same as the Book and the Pro 7 and the laptop when it comes to the aspect ratio, but the Pro 7 has a larger 12.3 and my Book has a 13.5. Now, while the Pro 7 is something that's compact but still capable with the performance that you might need, I found there wasn't much difference between my book size and the Pro 7 compared to when I was using the Go. The Go does feel that much smaller, and whilst you can argue about the reduced screen estate and the more compressed type cover keyboard, actually I found using it was a really enjoyable experience when it comes to wanting something much more lighter. It's only just over half a kilogram for the device, excluding the type cover keyboard, and the overall dimensions. It's something that I can actually throw into my jacket. I don't need to carry a very big bag, and I can take it on its own. And yes, you can argue that for the Surface Pro 7 with all the extra power performance, but when I compared the two side by side, I found the Surface Go just that much more agile. Now, moving on to the type cover experience. Downsizing to the Surface Go means you also downsize the type cover keyboard. And for some people, it might be too cramped, but definitely play around with it if you get the chance to go in stores, because I can type very close to, if not just as close to, what I type on the Surface Book. And that is very impressive for something that is much smaller. Yes, the keys are slightly closer together, which means you kind of have to adjust yourself and adapt to it. But these are still backlit. This is the signature Alcantara Cobalt Blue. And actually the trackpad is not that much noticeably smaller compared to the Pro 7. And is actually still very usable compared to my Surface Book. Not as tall, but very wide. So overall, the type cover experience is still going to be similar to what you expect on the larger ones. And then next one is underrated performance. If you put it into perspective with the performance of the Go, which is the Intel Pentium Gold, pretty much the lowest entry level CPU from Intel, and you compare that to the i3 or the Core M3, there's a very big sizable gap when it comes to computing performance. But in expectations, if you are coming into the Surface Go with the mindset it's just going to be doing, you know, typing documents, browsing the web, doing even some light edits, which it's capable of, especially if you do go for the 8GB RAM, which I found is just much better, and I'll cover that in the Surface Go video. Then actually I found it very responsive. It was fluid around the operating system. It runs Windows 10s out of the box that you can easily change into Windows 10 Home, and I didn't feel, compared to especially the Surface 3 and the earlier versions of the 10-inch version, it's very smooth. There wasn't any jitters, there weren't any stutters, slowdowns. Of course, if you start pushing the CPU with multiple Chrome browsers, which are heavily resource intensive, then you are going to notice that. But generally, I found the day-to-day experience to be very smooth. Underrated for people who are comparing it, doing more tasks that are just better suited to the Surface Pro and the Surface Book, and there are of course things that I just wouldn't even want to try on the Surface Go. But if you find you have a use scenario that complements your workflow in spaces where you just don't want to whip out your bigger main machine, then the Surface Go is a great option. Inking is also very usable. So for the Surface Go, I found there were either dedicated artists that are trying to use it for their main workflow or professions, and those that are very casual. I'm kind of someone who's in between, where I do like to be casual, using the pen to be productive and just drafting, but I also do some light design creative works in designing software, and that is just being able to have more hand-drawn fonts or hand-drawn designs when I'm creating. So I'm not someone that is too intensive, pretty easy, wouldn't imagine too many batched or layered designs, but I will have big files of multiple creations in one file, and that's where I'm interested to see how the Intel Pentium Gold performs. Now, of course, I'll see once I've actually used it going forward, but I definitely see for the kind of stuff that I'm doing that actually inking is a very nice experience. My time using it, I haven't seen jitters when I'm doing slow, smooth strokes, and generally just found it a very competent device, as long as you aren't using very big brushes or going really fast, and then that's when the computing performance starts to show itself with the delay, lag, and it can be very serious. But if you are using it in more slower or non-intensive manners, then actually inking in both designing and just general productivity can be really satisfying. Moving on, longer battery life. So with that being said, one of the upsides of having a less intensive processor is that battery life is generally better. It just doesn't draw as much power as, you know, more intensive processors would, like the Core i3, i5, i7. Of course, the 10th generations, they can be more energy efficient, but I found that it will just have larger battery draw than what you'd need if you are just doing light work on the Surface Go. Quoting from others online, people were seeing battery life on the Pro 7 roughly between 3 to 6 hours, depending how intensive, and of course I respect they're going to be doing different things on the Surface Go for ones that are draining battery quicker. But for the Surface Go, I found it to be 7-8 hours that people were getting consistently. So for me, where you want to just throw it in your bag, go from different locations, find yourself going to a cafe, whipping it out, or, you know, if you, for myself, going to the park exercising and wanted to replicate motions, knowing that the battery isn't going to die out on you is a plus. So battery life would be pretty good, but of course I'll test it myself. Next one, thicker bezels, but better to handle. Now, one of the things that was a bit of a drawback for me on the Surface Go and just manages to convince me are the thicker bezels. Now, I felt they were kind of several steps backwards compared to what Microsoft has tweeted out on the Surface lineup. The bezels were very good, and of course, especially when you look at the futuristic Surface Pro X, the bezels on this really stands out, quite glaring, and especially in 2020 now, this is, you wouldn't really expect it on devices. However, I found with a Go, where you'd be using it more in tablet or handheld mode for being more creative, because it's so much lighter, I won't have hand fatigue, which reminds me of times when I'm using it with the Surface Pro and the earlier models. The Surface 3, when I had it, was nice. It was thin, the bezels were thin. However, the sides were very sharp in the hands. They're not tapered like the Surface Go, which meant that actually when I held this in my hand, it was actually very enjoyable. So much that I kind of didn't mind about the thicker bezels, because it ergonomically helped me to handle the tablet better. And it's not that bad, especially when you put the type cover keyboard on it. I'm sort of just focused on the screen, which is very nice, by the way, that, you can kind of overlook the bezels. That being said, if they do make a Surface Go 2, of course, I'd love them to reduce the bezels. But for what it is, it's something that I can overlook, and it's something that is very satisfying to hold in the hand for long periods of time than other Surface models, which had a more aesthetic appeal. So for me, thicker bezels, but better to handle. So should I have waited for the Surface Go 2? Will they make one? Probably. There's still some use cases where the 10-inch would be preferable for people, but it's dwarfed by the Surface Pro by its form factor and just general power. Some of the reservations I had in the Surface Go, I would have liked an extra USB-A port to go with the USB-C. You do need to use an adapter, and something I have to get used to, versus, having multiple USB-A ports and memory card on my Surface Book. I'd love to see them use a Intel Core i3 or an M3. Either of those would just give it much more computing performance that would remove a lot of the stigma of why people would go for the Surface Go. Probably longer battery life. Battery life is decent, but there are other alternatives that are pushing over 10+ hours, which I'd like to see here. And of course, I like to see them shrink down the thicker bezels. But overall, I'm kind of happy with having this as my secondary device to do what I want to do right now. Now that moves over to the type cover keyboard. If you are looking to reduce the cost of getting a Surface, one of the ways you can do that is from the type cover keyboards. The Surface Pro 7 type cover keyboards, they have the non-Alcantara and Alcantara. There's quite a big price difference. I think it's roughly $20–30, but the Pro 7 keyboards are also $30 more expensive than the Surface Go. The signature one is $129, and the non-Alcantara, you could probably pick it up for $99. So if you want the Surface experience, you don't need that much power, but you want to keep the overall package down for the accessories that are pretty much an essential, like the keyboard, then you can do that from getting the Surface Go keyboards for the Go. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned about why I chose the Surface Go over the Pro 7 is the price. And the reason being is there's not really much of a price difference here. The Surface Go starts from $399, and that'll give you the 4GB RAM and 64GB eMMC storage, which is far slower and will affect the general overall performance. So I do recommend investing in the 128GB storage. That's an SSD, much faster, and 8GB RAM. It's just gonna last much longer for your use case over the period of time. The Surface Go starts at $399, and you can get the 128 for $549. That is excluding the $129 signature Alcantara keyboard, $99 Surface Pen, and also the $80 ArcTouch mouse, which is an optional, but if you are considering the overall package, it starts to rack up close to $1,000, and that's reaching into Surface Pro 7 territory. You can pick up the i3, roughly I think $749, and then with the type cover over $900, so it's very comparable. You won't get the pen or the mouse. However, if you want more performance and you don't necessarily need the pen and mouse, then that package would come in similar to something here, and the Pro 7 would be much better for you. So Why would you want to spend that amount? Well, you have to really want the Surface Go to overlook the Surface Pro 7 and alternatives. And for me, it was having the Surface experience in a more compact size. When you want that kind of premium performance for Windows in a smaller package where there aren't that many usable Windows alternatives in the 10-inch space, then the Surface Go becomes attractive. For me, it's a secondary device wanting that same familiar experience that I have on my Surface Book, where I'm used to that kind of standards, performance and expectations, and I'm happy with the performance of the Go, then the Surface Go becomes compelling. Again, it's a very expensive and premium proposition, but if you do want that kind of experience, then the Surface Go is the one that I've chosen. So to wrap up this video, I'm committed to the Surface Go. Now for me, I mentioned this is my secondary device, which didn't make sense wanting to spend a huge amount, which closes some of the power performance gaps between my Surface Book, just because it doesn't really make sense to. I'd go to my Surface Book to do much more intensive stuff, and I just want that mobility and enough performance in something that allows me to draft creations, ideas down, type productively, and something that's lighter to take with me anywhere. And after countless researching, watching videos online and playing around with it, I feel the Surface Go is able to do that. Now definitely stay tuned and subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be covering a lot more videos on the Surface Go. It was quite difficult for me to make my mind through the kind of videos that were available online, so I hope to go much deeper in my kind of workflow, installing non-touch apps or just apps that I want to run on here, see if they can run, how well do they run, the different browsers like Chrome that I've seen some people experience with stuttering versus the new Chromium Edge browser from Microsoft that is supposed to be much more fluid, the general touch experience with the Surface Pen, compare that to the Surface Pen I had from my Surface Book, the much older version. So thanks a lot for watching this video, world. I hope you found it useful, insightful, and my sort of reasons and use case why I choose the Surface Go over the Surface Pro 7. So if you have any questions about the Surface Go or anything that you want me to follow up on and see what the Surface Go is capable of doing, feel free to leave a comment just down below. Again, thanks a lot for watching this video, world. You can read everything that I've talked about today in this video on my website at onetechtraveler.com, and do join Team KBA and subscribe to my channel just down below. See you in the next video, world, but until then, keep being awesome. Peace.
I'm sorry, my actions, they haunt me, and I'll never live